250 years of fireworks, same story every single year. Almost none of it happened the way you were told. America didn't vote for independence on July 4th. Nobody signed it that day either. That bell that rang out the news, it probably never rang. That flag you're picturing, sewn by a woman from your textbook? No real proof it happened. In the next 12 minutes, we take apart 250 years of that story and rebuild it with what actually happened. This is episode 2 of 250 Docs. Stay to the end.
Early June 1776. One delegate stands up and proposes a resolution that the colonies are and ought to be free and independent states. It takes almost a month of closed-door argument before Congress is ready to vote, July 2nd. The vote happens, almost unanimously. One man in that room writes home that very night, certain that July 2nd, not July 4th, will be remembered forever as the country's true birthday, celebrated with parades and fireworks for generations. He was wrong about the date. He wasn't wrong about the fireworks. New York's delegation doesn't even vote that day. They're still waiting on instructions from home. The country had just declared itself free. It hadn't yet written down why. 2 days later, July 4th, Congress finally agrees on the wording explaining that vote to the world. This is the date everyone remembers. Here's what actually happened on it. Nobody signs it. Not 56 names, not even 10. The approved text is rushed straight to a printer who runs off around 200 copies overnight to send racing out to every colony. Only 2 men put their names on that printed sheet that day, the President of Congress and his secretary. That's it. That's the entire July 4th signing everyone imagines. Writers carry those 200 copies out across the colonies over the following days. Some towns don't hear the news for nearly 2 weeks. There's no single announcement moment, just paper spreading outward, town by town. You know the image. A giant bell in a church tower tolling wildly across the city the moment independence is announced, ringing so hard it cracks straight down the middle. It's a beautiful story. It's also almost certainly false. The tower that bell hung in was under repair that summer, unsafe to even operate. And the public didn't hear the declaration read aloud until 4 days later, on July 8th, from a public square by a colonel reading it to a waiting crowd. No bell, no cracked climax, just a man's voice and a crowd finding out together. The mass signing everyone pictures, 56 men, one room, one dramatic, unified moment, actually happens nearly a month later, on August 2nd. Even then, not everyone is in the room. This wasn't ceremony. It was confession. By putting his name on that page, each man was committing an act of treason against the most powerful empire on Earth. And it wasn't theoretical. That same summer, a massive British invasion fleet is already landing troops just miles from where these men are meeting. They weren't signing a celebration. They were signing something closer to their own death warrants, in case they lost. Here's the part almost nobody learns. A handful of delegates who voted for independence on July 2nd never signed the final document at all. Meanwhile, a few men who sign weren't even present for the vote. Some names trickle in over the following months. One signature isn't added until January of the following year. Congress simply keeps the door open, letting new arrivals add their names as a gesture of unity, long after the moment itself had passed. There was no single room, no single day. There were dozens of quiet, separate decisions, stretched out over more than half a year. And here's a detail that gets left out of nearly every telling. At least one man in that room votes against independence entirely on July 2nd, arguing the colonies aren't ready, that the risk is too great. He loses the vote. And then, weeks later, he walks up and signs the Declaration anyway, choosing to stand with the country he just argued against creating. The founding wasn't unanimous enthusiasm. It was people who disagreed, lost the argument, and signed on anyway. That's not a footnote. That's the actual founding. One more myth while we're here. The story of a Philadelphia seamstress hand-sewing the first American flag at the personal request of a future president. It's one of the most beloved images in American history. There's no evidence from the time it actually happened. The entire story comes from her grandson telling it to a historical society nearly a century later in 1870, with no documents, no letters, no contemporary account to back it up. Meanwhile, a different man, a signer of the Declaration himself, has the actual paper trail showing he billed Congress for flag-related design work that same year. History didn't pick the better documented story. It picked the better story. So why does one date get all the credit when the real story is spread across an entire summer? Because July 4th is the date printed at the very top of the document. Not the vote, not the mass signing, just the day the words themselves were finished. That printed header, even the original draft called it a unanimous declaration, even though New York hadn't voted yet. The printers had to quietly correct that word before it went out. Over 250 years, a single line of text at the top of a page hardened into a national identity. Parades, fireworks, an entire holiday built on the day the words were finished, not the days the decisions were actually made. There's one more thing worth sitting with. The document says all men are created equal. In 1776, that phrase didn't include the enslaved people whose labor built much of the colony's wealth. It didn't include women. It didn't include native nations whose land the new country was already expanding into. The men who wrote that sentence knew it was bigger than the world they were building. It took another century and a civil war to begin extending it to the enslaved, another 70 years after that for women to vote, decades more for full civil rights to even begin catching up to the words on that page. The Declaration wasn't a finished promise in 1776. It was an opening line. The rest of the country has spent 250 years still writing the sentence. Which brings us to this summer. A few weeks ago, on July 4th, 2026, the country marked exactly 250 years since that printed header line. Parades, tall ships, fireworks bigger than anything in a generation. An entire year of celebration built around America's 250th birthday. Almost everyone watching those fireworks believed they were marking the day independence was decided and the day it was signed. Now, you know neither of those happened that day. That doesn't make the celebration meaningless. If anything, It makes it more honest. A country celebrating not one clean, perfect moment, but 2.5 centuries of an argument it's still having with itself, in public, on purpose.
The date we celebrate was never really the date it happened. Maybe that's fitting. Independence was never one single moment. It was a process, messy, delayed, argued over, risked by people who didn't all agree with each other, just like the country it created. 250 years later, we're still writing the rest of the sentence.